The smell of pine was heavy in the air as we trudged along the narrow dirt trail, backpacks weighed down with tents, sleeping bags, and enough food to last the weekend. It was late September, and the nights were already crisp in the Appalachian Mountains. My friends, Jason, Lily, and Mark, had been planning this trip for months, and even though I had my doubts about leaving cell service behind, I couldn't back out now. The last time we'd all been together in the wilderness, it had been a benign, laugh-filled hike, but the forest seemed different this time. Denser, quieter, almost watchful. We set up our campsite in a small clearing about 3 miles from the trailhead. The sun was dipping below the ridgeline, casting long shadows through the trees. Jason was already unpacking the small propane stove while Mark scouted for firewood. Lily and I took the tents out of our bags, arguing over which spot would be best. I chose a spot near a cluster of tall oaks, partly because it felt sheltered, and partly because it was closest to the stream. The water was a narrow ribbon cutting through the forest, the sound of it trickling over rocks strangely soothing. As night fell, we built a fire and gathered around it, sharing snacks and cold beer. The forest was alive with the usual sounds: crickets, frogs, and the occasional hoot of an owl. But somewhere in the back of my mind, a flicker of unease persisted. Maybe it was just the darkness, or maybe it was the way the shadows seemed to move between the trees. I brushed it off, convincing myself I was overthinking things. After dinner, Jason suggested we play a game of flashlight tag, just for laughs. We split up, running through the trees, our laughter echoing through the woods. But as the game dragged on, I noticed something. Lily, who had been running ahead, suddenly froze. I caught up to her just as she whispered, "Do you hear that?" At first, I heard nothing but the usual nocturnal sounds. Then faintly, a rustling, slow, deliberate, and unmistakably human came from the edge of the clearing. We called to Mark and Jason, but when they arrived, the noise stopped, leaving only the wind through the trees. We tried to laugh it off, attributing it to deer or some other forest creature, but sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay in my tent listening to the fire crackle, occasionally hearing what sounded like footsteps outside. I convinced myself it was our imagination, or maybe a raccoon. When morning came, the forest looked peaceful again, almost as if it had never stirred the night before. But then we noticed the first unsettling sign. Our fire pit had been disturbed. Logs that we had stacked neatly were now scattered, and a thin layer of dirt covered the edges of the pit, as if someone or something had tried to hide it. We shrugged it off again. Maybe a wandering hiker had come by. But as the day wore on, more oddities appeared. We found footprints near the stream, larger than any humans, and they didn't match any of ours. Jason said they were probably bear tracks, but Lily wasn't convinced. The prints were too spaced out, too deliberate, like someone or something was stalking us, pacing around the clearing without fully entering it. That night, we made the decision to sleep in shifts. I volunteered for the first watch, flashlight in hand, ears straining for any sound. Hours passed with nothing but the usual forest noises. Just as I was beginning to doubt myself, a sharp crack rang out from the tree line. I swung the flashlight toward the sound and froze. A dark figure stood just beyond the reach of the light. It was tall, impossibly thin, with limbs that seemed slightly too long, and it watched us without moving. I woke the others immediately. Mark grabbed his hunting knife from the pack, and Jason and Lily huddled close. When we shone our lights toward the spot, the figure was gone. Whatever it was, it had disappeared silently. We tried to stay calm, reasoning that it could have been a deer, or maybe a trick of the light. But the tension had already set in. None of us slept well after that. Every crack of a branch, every rustle in the bushes set our nerves on edge. By the third day, the atmosphere in the forest had shifted. The woods seemed alive in a more malevolent way. We kept finding small signs, broken branches, more footprints, and once deep scratches on a tree near our tent, almost claw marks. Jason insisted we pack up and leave early, but Mark argued we should stick to our plan. Reluctantly, we agreed to stay until midday, hoping the daylight would ease the growing fear. While gathering water from the stream, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. Along the bank, partially hidden by leaves, were remnants of old campsite gear, rusted cans, shredded tarps, and a tattered sleeping bag. They looked as though someone had abandoned them in a hurry. Decades ago, maybe. Lily insisted we leave immediately, but as we walked back to our camp, we heard it again. The slow, deliberate steps always just on the edge of hearing, circling us. By evening, the forest's hostility had escalated. The fire wouldn't stay lit, no matter how we tried, and a thick fog rolled in that seemed unnatural, hanging low and muffling sound. That's when we first heard the whispers. Faint at first, barely audible, like wind through leaves, but distinctly human. They seemed to be calling our names, sometimes mocking, sometimes pleading. Jason wanted to investigate. I wanted to run. Mark was frozen in indecision. We decided to stay put, keeping the fire between us and the forest. Around midnight, the nightmare truly began. Something slammed into our tents. The impact was violent enough to throw us to the ground. When we scrambled outside, flashlight beams slicing through the fog, there was nothing to see, only the trees, swaying, shadows dancing. And then from behind us, the whispers became voices. Clear, distorted, chanting our names, coming from all directions at once. We ran blindly through the fog, tripping over roots, branches, whipping our faces. Somehow, we regrouped near the stream, hearts pounding, bodies trembling. That's when I saw it. A tall silhouette standing in the middle of the water, completely still. The shape was impossible to define, but it radiated a sense of hunger and malice. We froze. Even breathing felt loud. Then, as if sensing our paralysis, it moved. Slowly, unnaturally, stepping onto the bank, its elongated limbs bending in ways that shouldn't have been possible. We ran, never looking back until we reached the trailhead. The car was parked exactly where we left it, engine cold, but relief was short-lived. As we fumbled with the keys, I noticed scratches along the side doors, deep and jagged like claws. None of us spoke on the drive home. The woods faded behind us, but the memory didn't. For weeks afterward, every darkened forest, every rustle of leaves in the wind made us jump. And the worst part? When we finally reviewed photos from the trip, taken on Jason's old camera, there was one picture I couldn't explain. It was of the clearing, the fire pit, and our tents. And standing in the shadows, just at the edge of the frame, was the same tall, thin figure I had seen that first night. Its eyes, impossible, black, void-like, stared straight at the lens. I showed it to the others. Jason went pale, Mark's hands shook, and Lily whispered, "We shouldn't have stayed." Months later, we tried to make sense of it. Local rangers denied any reports of unusual activity. Stories of disappearances in that area were rare, but not unheard of. The thing was, we knew what we saw, and it had followed us. Sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I swear I hear that whispering again, faint but unmistakable, calling my name, reminding me that the forest never really lets go. We never camped together again. None of us set foot back in those woods. But the memory lingers, and I know it's still out there, waiting in the shadows, circling, patient, hungry. Story the end. The sky was an angry shade of gray as Ethan, Sarah, and their friends, Dylan and Rachel, drove into Blackwood Forest, a remote stretch of woods in upstate Pennsylvania. They had been planning this weekend trip for months, craving a chance to escape the city chaos and sleep under the stars. Blackwood had a reputation among locals. It was beautiful, dense, and eerily quiet, a place where people often went hiking and camping, but some swore strange things happened there. Ethan laughed off the warnings as they turned down the narrow dirt road that led to a small hidden campground. The campsite they chose was tucked in a depression between two hills, a clearing just wide enough for 2 tents and a small fire pit. The trees were thick, their trunks twisted and covered in moss. A creek ran nearby, its water dark but clear, whispering over rocks. They set up camp quickly, the usual laughter and teasing filling the space. As dusk fell, they gathered around the fire. Sarah made hot chocolate, Dylan pulled out a small speaker for music, and Rachel tossed pieces of bread to a few squirrels that had wandered near. The forest seemed alive but calm, and yet there was an edge, an almost imperceptible tension. It started subtly. Ethan thought he heard something moving in the trees, a soft rustling that didn't match the wind. He paused, listening. "Probably just an animal," Dylan said, brushing it off, tossing another log onto the fire. But then a snapping sound came from deeper in the woods, not a twig underfoot, but a deliberate snap, like someone stepping over broken branches. All 4 of them froze. The firelight flickered, casting long shadows across the clearing. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered. Rachel laughed nervously. "It's just a deer or something." But the sound returned, closer now, accompanied by a low guttural growl that made their skin crawl. Ethan stood, shining his flashlight into the darkness, but saw nothing. He swept the beam over the trees, the creek, the underbrush, but there was no movement. The growl came again, this time from the other side of the clearing, making them all jump. Suddenly, a figure stepped into the light. It was thin, unnaturally tall, with limbs that seemed slightly too long. Its skin was pale, almost gray, and its eyes reflected the flashlight beam with an oily shine. It didn't move like a human. Its jerky, awkward motion was like it was stumbling, but it moved with intent. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, clutching Ethan's arm. The figure didn't speak. It just stared. Then slowly, it moved closer. Dylan grabbed a nearby branch, brandishing it like a weapon, while Rachel shrieked and pulled at his sleeve. "Run!" Ethan yelled. They bolted, tripping over roots and rocks, the forest swallowing them in darkness. Behind them, the figure didn't chase with speed, but with a terrifying persistence. Its movements strange and unnatural, like it was made of broken pieces stitched together. The forest seemed to twist around them, familiar paths suddenly becoming mazes, trees seeming to close in. After what felt like hours, they reached a narrow, overgrown trail that led to a small abandoned cabin. The windows were shattered, and the door hung loosely on its hinges. Out of options, they climbed inside, barricading the entrance with whatever they could find. The forest outside was quiet now, but not peaceful. They could hear something moving just beyond the tree line, low whispers that didn't sound human. Hours passed in tense silence. They dared not sleep, listening to every snap of a branch and every whisper of the wind. Occasionally, shadows flickered in the broken windows, but they refused to look directly. Dawn was the only promise of safety, but it came slowly, creeping through the shattered windows like an uncertain witness. When the first rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, they cautiously left the cabin. The forest seemed normal again, peaceful even. No figures, no growls, no whispers, just the gentle babble of the creek and the rustling leaves. They hiked back to the main road, shaken and exhausted, eventually finding their way to a small ranger station. The rangers listened politely, but shook their heads. "Blackwood's a quiet forest. We haven't had reports of anything like that," one ranger said. They didn't argue. They packed their gear and left, all four of them glancing back at the looming forest. The images of the figure, pale and jerky, and the whispers that had followed them through the night stayed with them long after they left. Months later, Ethan would wake up in the middle of the night, convinced he heard a dragging footstep outside his window. Sarah avoided camping entirely. Dylan had recurring nightmares of tall, broken figures, and Rachel refused to be alone in any forested area. None of them spoke about it much, but the memory was a shadow that lingered, growing longer in the corners of their minds. And sometimes, when the wind was just right, they swore they could hear whispers again, low and guttural, calling from the darkness, just beyond the edge of the trees. Story: the end. The sun was just dipping below the ridge when we reached the edge of the forest, the last golden light flickering through the trees. My friends and I, Ethan, Claire, and Ben, had been planning this weekend for months, promising ourselves a real escape from school, work, and the noise of the city. We loaded our backpacks with tents, sleeping bags, food, and enough flashlights to light up a small city, thinking we were prepared. We weren't. We found a clearing a couple of miles from the main trail, beside a small, murky pond. The water was still, reflecting the darkening sky, and the air smelled damp and earthy. We set up our tents quickly, trying to get the campfire going before night fell completely. Ethan, always the impatient one, kept wandering to the edge of the woods to look around, muttering about how quiet it was. Too quiet. By the time the fire was burning, the forest had grown dark, oppressive. The shadows between the trees looked like they were moving just out of the corner of my eye. Ben laughed nervously, making jokes about forest spirits, and Bigfoot, but even he looked uneasy. Claire was the first to notice the sound. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. We all stopped. At first I heard nothing, just the crackle of the fire. Then it came, a faint dragging sound, like heavy feet moving through the underbrush. Slow, deliberate, circling the clearing. "Probably a deer or something," Ethan said, though his voice lacked conviction. But we all knew better. The sound wasn't natural. It didn't belong to any animal I'd ever heard. It had a weight to it, a purpose. We called for Ben, who had wandered closer to the pond, but there was no answer. Only the dragging noise continued, shifting slightly, closer now. Claire grabbed my arm, eyes wide. Suddenly there was a scream, low, strangled, and terrifying. It wasn't Ben's voice, not exactly, but it came from the trees, and it froze us in place. Ethan grabbed a flashlight, swinging it toward the woods. The beam caught on something, a figure standing just beyond the tree line. It was tall, unnaturally tall, and its limbs were twisted. Its head tilted at an impossible angle, and its eyes glinted in the light, too reflective, too knowing. It moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, like a puppet on broken strings. "Run!" I shouted. We bolted toward the tents, but the figure didn't chase immediately. It seemed to study us, patient, like it was waiting for something. That hesitation gave us just enough time to grab our packs and scatter into the trees. The forest closed around us. Every branch seemed to reach for us. Every shadow moved. The dragging sound followed, and sometimes we caught glimpses of more figures, tall, twisted, silent, always just beyond the trees. We regrouped near a small ravine, breathless and panicked. Claire was shaking, tears streaking her dirt-smudged face. "Where's Ben?" she asked. I swallowed hard. We had no idea. And then we saw it, a trail of footprints leading down the slope of the ravine, too large and too deep for any normal human. They disappeared into the darkness at the bottom. Ethan wanted to go after him. I refused. "We don't know what's down there," I said. "We don't even know what those things are." The dragging noise stopped suddenly, replaced by a high-pitched screech that made my ears ring. The creatures were close again, moving in patterns we couldn't predict. The forest around us seemed to pulse, alive, as if it were aware of our fear. We ran blindly, following a faint path that led to an old logging trail. That's when we found Ben, or at least a part of him, his backpack torn open, supplies scattered, but no sign of his body, only his flashlight, shattered. We kept moving, not daring to look back. The sounds of pursuit followed us until the first light of dawn began to seep through the trees. The creatures didn't chase us all the way, but we didn't stop to wonder why. We ran until the forest thinned, until we saw the road, and only then did we collapse, shaking and silent. We reported what happened to the rangers, but when they went back to check, they found nothing. No footprints, no torn backpack, no sign of the creatures. Just the forest, calm and still, as if nothing had ever happened. We never went back. Ben was never found. Even now, I can't bring myself to speak about it in detail. At night, sometimes I hear the dragging sound in the corners of my mind. Sometimes I see the glint of those impossible eyes in my dreams, watching, waiting, patient. The forest never forgets. The forest never forgives. Story, the end. The first night was deceptively peaceful. 4 friends, Ethan, Megan, Tyler, and Chloe, drove hours into the remote forests of Vermont, chasing the thrill of solitude and fresh air. They parked at a barely visible trailhead, where a wooden sign warned hikers of rough terrain and sudden weather changes. The friends laughed, ignoring the warning as a joke meant to scare tourists. They carried their gear through dense trees, following a narrow path that twisted and climbed. Sunlight barely touched the forest floor, and the shadows seemed to move when they weren't looking. By late afternoon, they found a clearing near a small moss-covered creek and decided it was perfect. Tyler set up a fire pit, Megan unpacked the food, Chloe arranged sleeping bags, and Ethan began pitching the tents. As the sun dipped below the tree line, the forest changed. Sounds intensified. Rustling leaves, branches snapping in the distance, and a low, echoing moan that didn't belong to any animal they knew. The friends tried to laugh it off, blaming the wind, but even in daylight there was a sense of wrongness, as if the forest itself was watching. Night fell quickly. They sat around the fire, telling ghost stories to mask the growing unease. Then they heard it, the faint sound of footsteps, deliberate and slow, crunching through leaves outside the clearing. Tyler shone his flashlight toward the edge of the trees, but saw nothing. The sound stopped, only to start again moments later, closer this time. "Maybe it's a deer," Ethan suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. Megan's face paled. "No deer walks like that. It's too heavy." They returned to their tents, trying to convince themselves it was nothing. But as they lay down, the air grew colder, the darkness thicker. Then came the first knock, soft, deliberate, against the canvas of Chloe and Megan's tent. "Who's out there?" Chloe called. her voice trembling. No answer. The knocks continued, rhythmic, like someone or something testing the fabric. Suddenly, the zipper of the tent slid open slightly, and they saw a shadow loom. It was impossibly tall, limbs unnaturally long, moving with an eerie, jerky precision. Megan screamed as the shadow disappeared into the trees. The footsteps moved around the campsite, never fully visible, but always circling, always listening. Hours passed. The friends stayed in their tents, hearts pounding, too scared to breathe. When dawn finally broke, the forest seemed calm again, but the sense of being watched remained. They found something chilling. The soil around the clearing bore enormous, clawed footprints, each the size of a small car tire, circling their campsite as if marking territory. They packed up and left quickly, promising never to return. On the drive back, the group tried to rationalize it. Bear? Mountain lion? Some strange local myth? None of it fit. The growls, the size of the creature, the deliberate behavior, it was not natural. Weeks later, Ethan received a package with no return address. Inside was a single, tattered glove, blackened and shredded, the size of a man's torso. There was no note, no explanation. The friend's fear turned into obsession. Tyler began having nightmares, waking to the sound of someone or something scraping outside his window. Chloe started hearing whispers calling her name while hiking in urban parks. Megan reported seeing a shadow in her apartment, long limbs pressed against the wall, vanishing whenever she turned. The last straw came when Tyler went missing. He had gone camping alone, insisting he could handle it. His car was found abandoned at the same trailhead, but he was gone. Search parties found nothing. The forest seemed to have swallowed him entirely. Ethan, Megan, and Chloe never spoke of the incident publicly, but they knew the truth. Whatever they had encountered was intelligent, patient, and territorial. They didn't just hunt. They watched, remembered, and marked intruders. The friends avoided forests entirely, but every so often, when the wind whistled through city streets or a shadow flickered in the corner of a window, they felt it, the presence of the thing that waited, unseen in the woods, always hungry for trespassers. Years later, locals still tell the story of the Tall Watcher, a creature that roams the forests of Vermont, stalking anyone who dares to camp where it rules. Ethan, Megan, and Chloe never returned, but the whispers never stopped. And sometimes, late at night, when the forest is silent, they say you can hear its footsteps circling, patient and unyielding, waiting for the next foolish human to wander too close. Story the end. It was a crisp October morning when 4 college friends, Ryan, Megan, Tyler, and Kara, loaded their backpacks into Ryan's old Jeep and set out for a weekend in the forests of northern Pennsylvania. They were experienced campers, but this time they wanted something more isolated, more off the grid, away from the weekend crowds at state parks. After hours of driving on winding roads flanked by dense trees, they found the trailhead Ryan had scouted online. The map promised a secluded clearing by a small stream, perfect for a quiet night under the stars. They hiked in under a bright sun, joking about ghost stories and local legends. Megan, the most cautious of the group, kept glancing over her shoulder, unsettled by the thick, shadowy canopy overhead. Tyler kept reassuring her it was just the woods and nothing more. By late afternoon, they reached the clearing. It was beautiful, surrounded by tall pines and a gentle stream running nearby. They pitched their tents, gathered firewood, and settled in. The first night was calm. The fire crackled, stars twinkled, and they roasted marshmallows, laughing about childhood fears. As darkness deepened, however, a strange feeling began to settle in. The forest grew eerily silent. No wind, no rustling animals, only the faint trickle of the stream. Ryan was the first to notice something was off. "Did you guys hear that?" he asked, pausing mid-roast. "Hear what?" Kara replied, tossing another marshmallow onto the stick. "Footsteps, like someone's walking around the edge of the clearing," he said. Megan froze, her eyes scanning the tree line. Tyler waved it off. "Probably an animal," he said. But the sound didn't match any deer or raccoon. It was heavy, deliberate, and circling them. Suddenly, a low growl came from the trees. It was deep, guttural, and it made their stomachs churn. Megan whispered, "We should go. Maybe we shouldn't have come so far out." Ryan grabbed a flashlight and shone it into the darkness, but only the shadows of trees met his beam. For a brief moment, a tall, thin silhouette flickered between the trunks, unnaturally long arms swaying. When he blinked, it was gone. The group tried to calm down, huddling near the fire, but every time they thought the sound had stopped, it returned, closer, circling, whispering. Not human words, just faint syllables that made their blood run cold. Around midnight, the first attack happened. Tyler, who had gone to the tent to grab extra blankets, screamed. Megan and Kara rushed toward the tent to find him on the ground, claw marks on his arm and leg, his backpack torn open. Whatever it was, it had been inside the tent and left without a trace except for the scratches and a strange sulfur-like smell. "We need to leave," Megan said firmly, panic creeping into her voice. Ryan nodded, grabbing their packs. But as they stepped into the darkness, the forest seemed to twist around them. The trail they had followed earlier was gone, replaced by thick underbrush and the distorted shadows of trees that seemed taller and closer than before. The footsteps followed them. Now, there was more than one. Sometimes from the left, sometimes from behind, always keeping pace, always watching. They ran, but the woods were disorienting. Hours, or maybe minutes passed, they couldn't tell. Their flashlights flickered as if the batteries themselves were afraid to shine. Then came the whispers again, this time surrounding them. Go, leave, never, return. The voices were close, almost in their ears, but no one was visible. Kara tripped, falling face first into mud. When she tried to get up, something slammed against her from behind, just a blur, fast and silent, enough to knock her to the ground. She screamed, but Ryan grabbed her hand, pulling her to her feet. They stumbled upon a small pond that reflected the pale moonlight. For a moment, they felt safe near the water, thinking maybe they could follow it to a road. But the pond itself seemed wrong. Shapes moved beneath the surface, long limbs, eyes glinting faintly, just beneath the water's edge. Ryan suggested splitting up to find the trail, but Megan refused. "We stick together," she said, fear overtaking reason. They moved as one, terrified of what might be watching. Suddenly the forest erupted with noise, snapping branches, guttural growls, and a high-pitched shriek that pierced the night. Shadows leapt from tree to tree, too fast to follow with their eyes. One of the figures, a grotesque humanoid with elongated arms and red, glowing eyes, stood directly on the trail. Its jaw opened impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth, and it let out a roar that echoed through the mountains. They ran blindly, tripping over roots and rocks, the underbrush clawing at their clothes and skin. Ryan's flashlight fell and shattered, leaving them in near total darkness. The sound of pursuit was relentless, always just behind them. Finally, dawn broke in a sickly gray light. They stumbled onto an old logging road, exhausted, scratched, and bleeding. No footprints, no signs of anything supernatural were found by the authorities, who later searched the area. The forest had swallowed any evidence of what they had encountered. They never spoke of the incident much after returning to campus. Tyler never fully recovered, often waking in the middle of the night screaming about hands grabbing his legs. Kara refused to camp again. Megan had nightmares of whispers and red eyes, and Ryan could never drive past dense forests without feeling eyes on him. Years later, they still avoided that part of Pennsylvania. The memory lingered, the heavy, deliberate footsteps, the whispers in the dark, the glowing eyes in the trees. Whatever had been out there had marked them, and the memory was a warning. Some places in the woods were not meant to be entered, and some things waited silently just beyond the light. Story the end. The late afternoon sun was slipping behind the hills as my friends and I drove up the winding roads toward the forest. There were 5 of us, me, Tyler, Sarah, Greg, and Mia, and we had decided on a last-minute camping trip in the Ozarks. The plan was simple: a night under the stars, a small fire, and no one to bother us for miles. Phones were mostly useless once we left the highway, and that was part of the appeal. At least that's what I kept telling myself. We parked at a small trailhead, unloaded our gear, and started hiking along a narrow dirt path. The forest was dense, the canopy thick, and the air smelled of damp earth and fallen leaves. The deeper we went, the quieter it became. Not just quiet, but the kind of silence that makes you hyper-aware of every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves. We joked about it to lighten the mood, but I could tell everyone was feeling it. By early evening, we found a clearing big enough for our tents and fire pit. Greg immediately got to work collecting firewood, while Tyler and I set up the tents. Mia and Sarah unpacked the food. As the last streaks of sunlight disappeared, we lit the fire. Shadows stretched across the clearing, dancing in the flickering light. For a while, it was like any other camping trip, laughing, roasting marshmallows, swapping ghost stories. But there was an edge beneath it, a sense that the forest was watching. Around 10 p.m., we heard it. At first, it was subtle, a low dragging sound from the trees beyond the clearing. Then it became a soft scratching, as though something was moving along the underbrush. Tyler laughed nervously and said it was just an animal. Greg, ever the skeptic, muttered something about raccoons, but Sarah's face had gone pale, and Mia clutched my arm. "It's not an animal," she whispered. We tried to ignore it, but the noises didn't stop. They circled the clearing, never close enough to see clearly, but always present. At one point, I swore I saw a shadow move against the tree line, tall and thin, like someone bending the rules of human anatomy. We all froze, staring into the darkness, hearts pounding. Whatever it was studying us. Trying to shake the fear, we decided to turn in for the night. We split tents, 2 people per tent, with Sarah and Mia in mine, and Tyler and Greg in theirs. I lay awake for hours, listening. The fire had mostly died down, leaving only embers, and the forest noises became louder, more distinct. Then I heard whispering. At first, it sounded like wind through the leaves. Then I realized it was calling our names, softly, tauntingly, from all around the clearing. I woke Sarah and Mia. We shone our flashlights into the forest, but saw nothing. Still, we stayed alert. Around 2 a.m., something heavy hit the side of our tent. The impact knocked the tent poles and made us scream. I yanked the zipper open, flashlight raised, but the clearing was empty, except for a set of footprints leading away from us into the darkness. They were too large, too elongated to be human, and they seemed to vanish into the forest as if swallowed by the earth. By morning, none of us spoke much. We had all been awake, watching, listening, but there was little to see in the daylight. We debated whether to pack up and leave, but the forest didn't feel safer with the sun out. While Tyler fetched water from a nearby stream, he stumbled on something half buried in the mud. It was a tattered backpack, ripped to shreds, and inside, fragments of old camping gear and rotted food. No one could say how long it had been there. The presence of it made the forest feel alive in a new, sinister way. We tried to leave that afternoon, but every path seemed wrong. The trail we had taken the day before was gone, replaced with a maze of trees and undergrowth that hadn't been there. Hours passed as we wandered, growing more panicked. Night fell again, and with it, the whispers returned. Closer this time, urgent and mocking. That night, we heard footsteps circling our small clearing, slow and deliberate. I peeked outside the tent and caught a glimpse of a figure, impossibly tall, thin, limbs bending unnaturally, standing motionless in the fog near the edge of the firelight. Its face was featureless, but somehow I knew it was looking right at me. We decided to make a run for it. Grabbing what we could carry, we fled into the forest, branches whipping our faces, fog thickening around us. The whispers followed, echoing our names, mocking our fear. We stumbled over roots, fell, and kept running until we finally broke through the tree line onto an old dirt road. We ran until we reached a small highway, where a truck stopped to pick us up. Even after we got back to town, the memory stayed with us. None of us camped together again. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been in those woods had followed us home, invisible but present. Sometimes at night, I swear I hear a faint rustle outside my window, soft but deliberate, like someone pacing, watching, waiting. When we reviewed photos taken during the trip, one in particular made my stomach drop. In a photo of the clearing, barely visible in the background, was a dark, elongated shape, standing at the edge of the trees, unnaturally still. Its proportions were wrong, limbs too long, its head too high. It wasn't there when we took the picture, and yet it had been watching us the entire time. The forest had claimed that night, and none of us ever set foot back there. Sometimes I think about it, the whispering, the feeling of being hunted, and I know that whatever was there isn't done. It never leaves. Story the end. The day started like any other summer weekend. 5 of us, me, my brother Kyle, our friends Jenna, Marcus, and Riley, had loaded up our SUVs with tents, food, and camping gear for a long weekend deep in the Appalachian wilderness. The plan was simple. Hike in, set up camp by the creek, fish, and spend the nights under the stars. None of us had ever been that deep into the woods before, but we figured we'd stick to the trail and stick together. By late afternoon, we found a spot along a narrow bend in the creek. It was perfect, flat ground, surrounded by towering pines and enough space to pitch our tents. As we set up, the air had that unmistakable heavy scent of wet earth and rotting leaves, and the shadows were long and sharp, stretching unnaturally in the setting sun. Kyle and Marcus gathered firewood, while Jenna and Riley unpacked food. I stayed behind, leaning against a tree, noticing how quiet it was. Too quiet. No birds, no rustling squirrels. Just the creek and the occasional crack of a branch far off. After the fire was going, we roasted hot dogs and marshmallows, joking and trying to ignore the creeping feeling that we were being watched. As night fell, the forest seemed to close in around us. The firelight flickered against the trunks, and every movement in the shadows made us flinch. Around midnight, Riley said he thought he heard footsteps in the brush, just beyond the ring of light. We laughed nervously, insisting it was just a deer, or maybe a raccoon, but none of us slept well that night. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a strange scratching sound on the tent fabric. At first, I thought it was Kyle shifting in his sleeping bag, but the noise was deliberate, slow, and measured. I shook him awake, but he hadn't heard anything. That's when the whispering started. Low, hissing voices, weaving through the trees, impossible to localize. It wasn't English or any language I knew. It was guttural, urgent, almost pleading. The next morning, we decided to explore the area and hike a bit farther along the trail. Kyle led the way with his compass and map, but after a few hours, everything started to look unfamiliar. Trees twisted into impossible shapes, the creek curved in directions it hadn't before, and landmarks we thought we knew disappeared. Even the sun seemed wrong, hanging low when it should have been higher. Anxiety crept in as we realized we were hopelessly lost. By midday, tempers flared. Marcus wanted to keep moving in one direction. Jenna argued for backtracking. Riley and I were too scared to make any decisions. That's when we saw them, figures in the trees. At first, they looked like people, tall, thin, wearing dark clothing, but as we watched, their movements became jerky, unnatural, limbs bending wrong, heads tilting too far back. When they noticed us, they didn't run, but didn't hide. They just stared, unblinking. Night fell again, and we tried to keep our makeshift camp in a small clearing. Sleep was impossible. Shadows slithered through the trees, circling us. Occasionally, one would step into the firelight. Their faces were pale, almost translucent, eyes black and empty. Every time we looked away, they were closer. The whispering never stopped. It was maddening, pressing into our minds, repeating phrases we couldn't understand, but somehow knew were warnings. On the third day, things got worse. Riley disappeared first. One moment he was arguing with Jenna about which way to go. The next, he was gone. We searched for hours, calling his name, but found only a trail of footprints that ended abruptly at a tree. We tried to convince ourselves he had wandered off and would come back, but deep down, we knew something else had taken him. Hours later, we stumbled across a ruined campsite. Rusted, torn tents, burned out fire pits, and empty cans scattered across the ground. Names were carved into the trees, dozens of them, some fresh, some decayed beyond recognition. The fresh ones looked eerily familiar. The handwriting was our own. Panic set in. We couldn't leave. We couldn't stay. The forest itself seemed to pulse around us, closing off the trails, moving us further in. The fourth night was hell. We heard them moving just beyond the firelight, closer than ever. One of the figures finally stepped into the clearing. A man-shaped form, impossibly tall, skin gray and mottled, limbs bending the wrong way. Its face twisted in a grotesque imitation of human features. It tilted its head, staring at us, and then it vanished. By dawn, Kyle was convinced we had to run, to try blindly to escape. We did, sprinting through the woods, trying not to look back. Every step seemed to loop us back to the same place, the ruined campsite. Exhaustion and fear were breaking us down. We argued, screamed, and cried. Every decision seemed wrong, and the forest seemed to mock us, shifting, twisting, trapping us further. On the fifth day, Jenna lost it. She ran screaming into the trees, calling Riley's name. We chased her, but she disappeared, swallowed by the darkness. Kyle and I were left, broken and terrified. By now, food and water were gone, and even the sun seemed distant, unreachable. That night, the whispering became voices we could understand, though it sounded like a crowd of people speaking at once. Stay, stay forever. It filled the clearing, pressing into our minds. Then the figures emerged, more numerous than before, circling us. They didn't speak, they just stared, watching, waiting. I don't remember much after that. I blacked out from exhaustion, fear, and dehydration. When I came to, I was lying near the trailhead, alone. Kyle, Jenna, Riley, and Marcus were gone. The forest behind me looked normal, sun filtering through the trees, birds chirping as if nothing had happened. My backpack was missing, my gear scattered. My phone had service, and when I checked, there were no missed calls, no messages, as if everyone had vanished. I left the woods immediately. I never returned. Even now, months later, I can still hear the whispers sometimes, faintly at first, then louder, calling my name, urging me to come back. The friends I went with are gone. I don't know if they're alive or dead or what waits in those woods, but I know this. The forest remembers. The forest waits, and it doesn't forget. Story, the end. It was mid-October when we decided to go camping in the remote backwoods of northern Maine. I was with my two closest friends, Sam and Derek, both thrill seekers like me, always looking for a place untouched, a place where we could disappear for a weekend. The area we picked had no cell service, no marked trails, and a reputation among locals as cursed or haunted, depending on who you asked. We laughed off the warnings. Superstition had never scared us before. We arrived just as the sun was dipping behind the dense pine forest. The air was sharp, carrying a damp chill that seeped into our jackets. The drive had been long, with the gravel road narrowing until our Jeep rattled over rocks and potholes. When we parked, the woods seemed impossibly still. There were no birds, no rustling animals, just silence, heavy and unnatural. Our first task was setting up camp. The clearing we found was small but adequate, with a creek nearby and fallen logs that made good seating. We pitched the tents, gathered firewood, and as darkness approached, built a fire that threw flickering shadows across the clearing. The first night was quiet, almost too quiet. We joked about being the only humans for miles, but I felt a nagging sense that we were being watched, even as I laughed with Sam and Derek. Around midnight, Sam woke us. She said she'd heard someone whispering her name. At first, we thought it was wind, branches brushing together, but the whisper came again, clear, deliberate, and closer this time. We shined our flashlights into the darkness, but there was nothing. No figure, no movement, nothing but black trees and shadows. Derek, ever the skeptic, told her it was her imagination, but his voice lacked conviction. The following morning, we went for a hike, intending to explore the woods. The deeper we went, the stranger the forest became. The trees were unnaturally close together, roots and vines twisting across the path in ways that made progress slow and exhausting. Occasionally, we'd catch movement out of the corner of our eyes, figures darting behind trees, but whenever we turned, there was nothing there. By nightfall, the forest had a different feel. The wind had died, and the silence was oppressive. We returned to our campsite to find the firewood we had stacked gone. Not scattered, not taken randomly, but gone entirely. Sam suggested we leave, but Derek argued we'd only camp one more night, insisting it was all in our heads. I didn't argue. I couldn't shake the sense of being watched. That night, the whispers returned. They were everywhere, circling the tents, coming from the trees, the creek, the ground itself. Then the knocking began, soft at first, then rhythmic, like someone tapping on the trees, moving closer with each knock. Our flashlights picked up shadows darting just beyond the firelight. Something was moving out there, and it wasn't an animal. Around 2 a.m., the worst happened. Derek's tent was shaking violently, zipper rattling under pressure. He shouted for us, and we rushed with sticks and a flashlight, but when we opened the tent, it was empty. No signs of struggle, no footprints, nothing but the torn fabric and the dirt of the clearing. Sam and I panicked. We shouted, ran around the camp, trying to find him, but there was nothing. By first light, we knew we had to leave. We packed frantically, ignoring breakfast, ignoring sleep, but when we tried to follow the trail back, the forest seemed to change. Familiar landmarks disappeared. Paths we had walked the day before were now blocked by thick underbrush. Every direction we took led us deeper into the woods, the terrain growing more twisted and unfamiliar with every step. As the day wore on, exhaustion set in. We stumbled across strange symbols carved into trees, crude humanoid figures with long, spindly arms, eyes etched deep into the bark. Small piles of stones in odd formations marked the forest floor, and the air was filled with the faint metallic smell of blood. or maybe iron in the soil. The whispers persisted, now intelligible in fragments. Leave, stay, join. The voices echoed from all directions, impossible to locate. That evening, we found an abandoned cabin, broken windows, rotting wood. It seemed like salvation, a place to rest, but the interior was worse than outside. Scratch marks marred the walls, and in the corner we saw a bundle of old, decayed clothing. Human, we realized with horror, though who it belonged to we could not tell. A sudden creaking above us made us freeze. Something, or someone, was on the roof, pacing slowly, deliberately. We left the cabin immediately, but it was too late. The forest had become hostile, paths twisting back on themselves, trees forming walls, branches snagging at our clothes and hair. The shadows now had shape, tall, emaciated, almost human figures with elongated limbs and faces hidden in darkness. They followed us, never attacking directly, but watching, circling, herding us deeper into the woods. Night fell again. Sam and I huddled against a large fallen log, shivering, whispering about what had happened to Derek. That's when we realized the whispers were calling our names individually. I looked up and saw one of the figures at the edge of the firelight. Thin, impossibly tall, its head tilted unnaturally, eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. It stepped closer, and I felt a cold chill seep into my bones. We ran blindly, tripping over roots and rocks, desperate to escape. The forest seemed endless, and the figures never left our sight, keeping pace effortlessly. At some point, Sam fell, twisting her ankle. I dragged her along, shouting, crying, trying to find the jeep, the service road, anything. But the forest had swallowed all sense of direction. By dawn, we stumbled onto a narrow dirt road. Exhausted, bruised, and terrified, we ran to our jeep, finding it exactly where we had parked. We drove without stopping for hours, finally reaching the nearest town. Authorities were called for a search, but as with Derek, there was no trace of the figures, the cabin, or anything unusual in the forest. The only proof of what happened were the scratches on our arms and the whispers still echoing in our minds, refusing to fade. We never returned to those woods. Sam moved to the West Coast, changed her phone number, and avoids forests entirely. I still can't explain what happened, and I'm not sure I want to. Every autumn, when the wind shifts and the leaves turn, I feel the presence again. The tall, dark figures, the whispering, and the sense that the forest is still waiting, patient, hungry, and entirely alive. Story the end. The first time I realized something was wrong was when the forest went silent, so silent that even our breathing seemed too loud. We had arrived at Black Hollow Campground late in the afternoon after a long drive through winding mountain roads. It was supposed to be a simple weekend trip. Me, my cousin Eric, his girlfriend Alicia, and our friend Brandon. We wanted a break from work, noise, and the constant ping of notifications. Black Hollow was remote, tucked deep in the Appalachian woods, barely a dot on the map. Perfect, we thought. We didn't know what we were stepping into. The place was empty when we pulled in. Not just quiet, empty. Campsites were overgrown, the wooden sign at the entrance missing half its letters, and the old ranger station looked like it hadn't been opened in years. Eric tried to connect to cell service, but we were too far out. No bars, no connection. Just the woods, tall and thick, as if forming a wall around us. We set up camp anyway, telling ourselves it didn't matter. We'd have a fire, cook some food, crash, and hike in the morning. As the sun dipped behind the ridge, the trees cast long, jagged shadows across the site. The air grew colder than it had any right to be in early fall. We blamed elevation. Now I know it wasn't that. Around the fire, the conversation turned to ghost stories. Of course it did. Brandon teased Alicia for being jumpy, but even he kept glancing over his shoulder, as if expecting someone to walk out of the woods. At one point, he shone his flashlight into the thick trees and muttered, "Feels like we're being watched." Eric told him he was paranoid, but the way he said it, too fast, too sharp, made me think he didn't believe it himself. Later, as we settled into our tents, I heard footsteps, not animal steps, heavy, slow, deliberate. I thought it was Brandon going to take a leak, but when I called out, no one answered. The footsteps stopped. Then a long, low exhale came from behind my tent. I froze. My heart slammed in my chest. I whispered Eric's name. Silence answered. Morning felt like a blessing. The light washed away some of the fear, though none of us slept well. Alicia said she heard someone calling her name during the night. Eric swore something brushed against his tent. Brandon complained that his shoes had been moved, placed neatly side by side 10 feet away, toes pointed toward the woods. We tried to laugh it off, but we didn't laugh long. After breakfast, we decided to explore the trails. The map we found nailed to the old bulletin board showed miles of paths, though most were unmarked and probably unused for years. We hiked a mile or so before we found the first sign that something was terribly wrong. A campsite. Long abandoned, tents collapsed and torn, clothes scattered, shredded as if by claws, pots rusting in the dirt, a cooler cracked open and empty. Then we saw the symbols, carved into the trees, deep gouges that weren't letters or pictures, but something else, twisted, interlocking shapes that made my stomach tighten. Alicia said they looked like warning signs, and I agreed. But Brandon, stupid and cocky, traced one of the carvings with his fingers and joked, "Maybe Bigfoot's territory." The joke died when Eric found the bones, a pile of them, small ones, animal mostly, but some larger, too large, split cleanly down the center as if cracked open. We left the clearing fast. By midday, the clouds rolled in, dark and heavy. The forest grew dim, and the silence that had unsettled us the night before returned, thicker, deeper, absolute. No birds, no insects, not even the rustle of small animals. That's when we heard it. A whistle. Long, drawn out, echoing through the trees. Not a tune, more like someone trying to get our attention. We stopped. It came again, this time closer. Alicia whispered, "Who's out here?" No one answered. Instinct told me to go back to camp, to get out of the woods before dark. We hurried along the trail, but the whistle followed, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, sometimes right next to us, so close I felt the vibration in my chest. When we reached camp, the fire pit was full of fresh ash. We hadn't lit a fire that morning. Someone had been there. Someone, or something. Eric grabbed the hatchet. Brandon held the flashlight like a weapon. Alicia was shaking. I tried to stay calm, but fear pulsed through me. We needed to leave. Now. But our van wouldn't start. The engine clicked, sputtered, then died. We tried again and again, the noise echoing too loudly in the dead forest. As night fell, the fog rolled in, thick, cold fog that hugged the ground and swallowed the trees. Sounds started in the distance, cracking branches, soft footsteps, whispers, whispering our names. We huddled near the fire we reluctantly lit. The flames danced wildly, tossed by erratic wind that seemed to come from every direction. Brandon kept cursing under his breath. Eric stared into the woods like he expected something to step out at any moment. Alicia cried quietly. Then the voices came. Not whispers, as human voices. A man calling for help. A woman sobbing. A child laughing, all overlapping, all drifting through the fog. They sounded close, impossibly close. But when we shone our flashlights into the trees, there was nothing. Then something moved just beyond the firelight. Tall, wrong-shaped, leaning forward like a bent tree. Its arms were long, too long, ending in claw-like fingers that scraped the dirt. I only saw it for a second before it blended back into the fog, but that second will never leave me. Alicia screamed. Eric grabbed her, pulling her close. Brandon shouted that we needed to get in the van, working or not. We ran. The fog swallowed us whole. Inside the van, we locked the doors and ducked low. The voices grew louder. The whistle came again, sharp and piercing. Something brushed against the side of the van. Something clawed at the rear door. The whole vehicle rocked as if something enormous was pushing on it. Eric yelled for us to stay down. Brandon held the hatchet ready to swing. My ears rang with the pounding in my head. Then, from the fog, a face pressed against the window. Gray skin stretched thin. Eyes black, reflective. Mouth twisted into something like a smile, but wider, so wide it split the skin at the corners. Its breath fogged the glass. It whispered my name in a voice that sounded like leaves scraping together. I screamed. It vanished. The rocking stopped. The whispers faded. The forest fell silent again. We stayed in the van until dawn, terrified to move. When the sun finally rose, the fog lifted. The trees looked normal again. The forest seemed harmless. We stumbled out, shaken but alive. The van started on the first try. We didn't look back as we drove away. When we reached the nearest town, we went straight to the sheriff's office. They listened, nodded politely, and told us the campground had been closed for years due to unexplained disappearances. They suggested we get some rest, maybe talk to someone if the stress was overwhelming. None of them believed us. But I know what I saw. We all do. Eric won't go near the woods anymore. Brandon moved across the country. Alicia refuses to sleep without a light on. Me? Every now and then, when I'm alone at night, I hear a whistle drifting through my open window. Long, drawn out, just like before. And I know it isn't the wind. Story the end. The first time I ever stepped foot in Silver Elk Forest, I felt something was wrong. It wasn't the kind of wrong you can point at or describe. It was a heaviness in the air, a silence too complete, a feeling that the trees themselves were listening. But I ignored it because we were excited. Me, my cousin Ryan, and his best friend Eric. We were all 20-something guys who thought we were tough enough to camp anywhere. And for the first day, it really did feel like the perfect trip. The plan was simple. 3 days in the woods, no phones, no distractions, just hiking, fishing, and a break from the chaos of work. We drove up from Maryland and crossed into a dense stretch of Pennsylvania forest that wasn't even a real campground, just an unofficial site Ryan had found on some old hiking forum. We arrived late afternoon. The forest canopy was thick, letting in only slivers of sunlight even at midday. The air smelled like pine sap and damp soil. The site itself was just a small clearing next to a narrow creek, surrounded by huge towering pines that looked like they hadn't been touched in a century. It felt secluded, peaceful, almost too quiet. We pitched our tents, gathered firewood, and settled in. As night fell, the quiet deepened. No birds, no insects, no wind, just thick, suffocating silence. Even the creek seemed hesitant to make noise. Around the fire, we joked to break the tension. Eric started telling ghost stories, and Ryan rolled his eyes, saying, "If anything out here wants to kill us, it'll be a pissed-off bear." We all laughed, but something about the forest made that laughter die fast. The first strange thing happened around 10 p.m. We heard a noise, quiet but sharp, coming from the woods across the creek. It wasn't a branch breaking or rustling leaves. It sounded like someone dragging something across the ground. Slow, heavy, rhythmic. Eric pointed his flashlight across the creek, but the beam barely pierced the darkness. "Probably a deer," he said, though his voice wasn't convincing. The dragging continued for another 10 seconds, then stopped completely. We waited. Nothing happened. We eventually settled back down, but none of us were relaxed. The second strange thing happened when we went to sleep. I woke up around 3 a.m., heart pounding for no reason. The forest was pitch black. For a few seconds, I thought I heard whispering. Not voices exactly, more like movement, soft and quick, circling the campsite. I unzipped my sleeping bag and sat up, listening. A shadow moved outside my tent, a tall one, very tall. I held my breath. The shadow paused, then slowly drifted away into the trees. No footsteps, no sound, just a shifting darkness that melted back into the forest. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, Ryan brought it up before I could. "Did either of you idiots walk around the tents last night?" he asked. His face was pale. "Because something was out there." Eric shook his head. "You mean the dragging thing? That was probably just a—" "I mean, something stood outside my tent," Ryan interrupted. "Tall, wrong-looking." I swallowed hard. "I saw it too." Eric tried to laugh it off, but he couldn't hide the fear building in his eyes. "Probably trees casting shadows." "In the pitch dark?" I asked. "With no moonlight?" He had no answer. We tried hiking after breakfast, but the deeper we went into the forest, the stranger things felt. The trees leaned unnaturally, all angled slightly toward the same direction, as if bending to look at something. The forest floor was scarred with long drag marks, deep grooves that cut clean lines through pine needles and dirt. Some looked fresh. Around noon, we found something none of us could explain. A tree with its bark shredded 10 feet up, not claw marks, but torn in long, deliberate strips, as if something tall had peeled it away piece by piece. Ryan backed away from it. "I don't like this," he muttered. "Let's go back." We did, walking fast, barely talking. The woods felt darker than before, heavier. Multiple times I thought I heard footsteps behind us, but every time we turned around, there was nothing. Back at camp, the air felt wrong, as if the forest had tightened its grip on the clearing. Shadows were thicker. The silence was worse than the night before. Around 5, Eric went to collect more firewood toward the creek while me and Ryan organized gear. He was gone maybe 5 minutes before we heard him shout. Guys, get over here!" We sprinted toward his voice. Eric stood at the creek bed, shaking, pointing across the water. On the other side, half hidden behind trees, was a shape. It was tall, at least 8 feet, and thin in a way no human could be. The limbs were too long, the joints angled wrong, and its skin looked pale, stretched tight over bone. It didn't have a face, not one we could make out, just a long, smooth shape where a face should have been. It wasn't moving, just standing, watching us. None of us breathed, none of us spoke. The creature tilted its head in a slow, unnatural rotation, as if studying us. The moment the beam of Ryan's flashlight hit its torso, it melted backward into the trees. Not ran, not walked, slid, like smoke retreating from light. Eric stumbled back, almost falling into the creek. What the hell was that? What the hell was that? We're leaving, Ryan said, right now. We grabbed only what we could carry, left the tents, the cooking gear, everything. We didn't care. The sun was dipping, and none of us wanted to be in that forest when night came again. We moved quickly toward the trail, but it didn't feel like the forest wanted us to leave. Branches cracked behind us. Leaves rustled. Something followed. Multiple times I felt warm breath on the back of my neck, but every time I turned, nothing was there. Then the dragging sound started again. Shh, shh, louder, closer, faster. Eric broke into a run. Move, move. We sprinted, stumbling, slipping on roots and rocks. The dragging turned into steps, fast, furious, gaining on us. I didn't dare turn around, but Ryan did, and the sound he made, half scream, half gasp, told me everything. It's behind us! It's right behind us! The forest seemed to bend inward, the trees crowding the trail, closing us in. I could hear something huge crashing through the brush, snapping branches, breathing harshly like an animal that shouldn't exist. Then Eric tripped. He hit the ground hard, rolling down a small slope. Ryan and I skidded to a stop at the top. Get up! Ryan screamed. Get up! Eric tried. He really did. But something reached the bottom of that slope before he could stand. I didn't see it clearly. I didn't want to. A pale shape, tall and jagged, lunged from the shadows and hit him with a force that made a sickening crunch echo through the woods. Eric's scream was short, cut off. Then the dragging sound returned. Shh, shh, shh. But this time, it wasn't dragging something across the ground. It was dragging him. His fingers clawed at the dirt, leaving deep trenches as he vanished into the darkness. Ryan started down the slope, but I grabbed him. No, he's gone. He's gone, Ryan. Run. He didn't argue. We fled. The dragging faded behind us, replaced pounding of our own footsteps and the horrible knowledge that the creature wasn't far behind. We didn't stop running until we burst into the gravel parking area where our car sat. The forest edge was at our backs, black and silent. Ryan scrambled for the keys, dropped them, got them again, and threw himself into the driver's seat. I leapt in beside him. The engine roared to life just as something huge slammed into the tree line behind us, shaking the branches violently. Ryan didn't hesitate. He floored it. The last thing I saw in the rearview mirror was a tall, pale shape standing at the edge of the woods, watching us leave. It didn't chase. It just stared. Like it knew we wouldn't come back. Like it didn't need to. We called the sheriff when we got into town, but they found nothing. No creature, no tracks, no signs of Eric. They said he probably wandered off, even though we told them exactly what happened. Even though we showed them the gashes on the trees and the drag marks in the soil, they didn't believe us. But something else did. 2 weeks after the incident, Ryan called me in the middle of the night, whispering, panicked. It's outside my house, he said. It's standing at the edge of the yard. I listened. I could hear tapping on glass, slow, rhythmic. The next day, Ryan was gone. House empty, car still there, front door wide open. The only sign of him was a trail of drag marks leading from his porch toward the woods behind his property. I haven't slept right since, haven't gone near a forest, haven't camped ever again. But sometimes late at night when the wind is still and the world is quiet, I swear I hear that sound again outside my window. Shh, shh, waiting. Story the end. The sun was just dipping below the horizon when my friends and I arrived at the edge of Black Pine Forest in northern Maine. We'd been planning this weekend trip for months, a chance to get away from the city, breathe some real air, and disconnect from everything. There were 5 of us, me, Jake, Emma, Ryan, and Chloe. The plan was simple. Hike in a few miles, set up camp, fish in the nearby creek, and roast marshmallows over a fire. Easy, fun, safe. Or so we thought. The forest greeted us with its usual heavy silence. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. Just the sound of our boots crunching pine needles and dry leaves underfoot. I felt it the moment we crossed the first ridge. A pressure, like the forest was watching, waiting. I shrugged it off, blaming nerves, but Emma gave me a look that said she felt it too. We found a clearing by a bend in the creek just as the last of the daylight disappeared. Ryan immediately set up the fire, and Jake started pitching tents, while Chloe and Emma gathered sticks for kindling. I wandered a little further down the creek, letting the water run over my fingers. The forest looked beautiful, peaceful, but the deeper I looked into the shadows, the more I felt something hiding in them. It began innocently enough. A twig snapping here, a brush moving there. At first we assumed it was deer or raccoons, but then came the whispers. Faint at first, like the wind playing tricks, barely audible, but unmistakably words. Leave. Go back. I froze. Jake was telling a joke nearby, trying to lighten the mood, but the whispering continued, growing louder, more urgent. Emma grabbed my arm. Did you hear that? She whispered. I nodded, trying to play it off. It's probably the wind, I said, but my voice was shaky. As night fell, we settled around the fire, telling scary stories to pass the time. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, light circling us just beyond the firelight. Chloe kept glancing toward the tree line, eyes wide. I think someone's watching us, she finally admitted. I tried to convince her it was a prank by one of us, or maybe another group of campers, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Then came the first sound that made my stomach turn. Footsteps in the dark, soft, slow, deliberate, moving along the edge of the clearing. Not animal footsteps. Human. Ryan, always the brave one, grabbed a flashlight and shone it into the trees. Nothing. The forest stared back, black and empty. But we all heard it, the whispering again. Louder this time, multiple voices overlapping. You shouldn't be here. The fire flickered, casting eerie shadows across the clearing. That's when we saw it. A figure, tall and thin, stepping from behind a tree. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, like it wasn't fully in control of its own body. Its face was obscured, but its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. We froze, unable to move, hearts pounding. Chloe screamed, and the figure vanished as quickly as it appeared. Jake tried to laugh it off, but even he looked terrified. We decided to stay in the tents, huddled together, hoping the morning would bring rational explanations. But sleep didn't come. Every rustle, every crack of a branch outside the tent sounded like footsteps approaching. And then we heard it. Tapping. Light at first, then heavier, moving around the tents in a slow, methodical circle. Emma whispered, trembling, It's circling us. We waited it out until the first light of dawn, too scared to move. When the sun rose, the forest seemed normal again. Birds sang, the creek gurgled like nothing had happened. We all agreed we'd leave immediately, pack up, and hike back to the car. But when we tried to follow the trail back, the forest had changed. Trees that should have been to our left were now on our right. Landmarks were gone. We walked for hours, circling the same clearing we had camped in, even though we had tried to move away. The forest didn't want us to leave. By late afternoon, panic had set in. Chloe collapsed on the ground, sobbing. Emma whispered that she could see them now, figures standing between the trees, watching us, always just out of reach. Shadows that weren't ours. I saw them too. Tall, thin, barely human, lurking just beyond the firelight in my memory, now in the daylight. We ran blindly, hoping to find the trail. Hours passed, the sun sinking again, and the shadows seemed to grow longer, darker, as if the forest itself were stretching out to trap us. Eventually, night fell again, and with it, the whispers returned, closer this time, circling us. We tried to climb a ridge to get our bearings, and that's when we saw it, a figure standing on the path ahead, impossibly still. Its head tilted unnaturally, glowing eyes fixed on us. As we screamed and ran, the figure moved with impossible speed, keeping pace with us without effort. Every direction we turned seemed wrong, leading us back toward the clearing, toward it. Exhausted, terrified, we stumbled into a small ravine. Chloe and Emma couldn't go any further. Jake and Ryan carried them a few more steps, and that's when the first one grabbed Ryan. He screamed, a high-pitched, panicked sound that cut through the night. I tried to pull him free, but the figure disappeared into the darkness, dragging him back into the shadows. Chloe and Emma were sobbing, paralyzed with fear. I grabbed them both and ran blindly until I found the trail again. The forest seemed to obey me now, letting me escape while keeping the others behind. When I finally reached the road and the car, I locked the doors and drove without looking back. Authorities found no trace of Jake, Ryan, Chloe, or Emma. They told me they likely got lost and succumbed to the forest. But I know the truth. I saw what took them. I heard the whispers, the tapping, and I'll never forget the eyes glowing in the dark. Years later, I still get nightmares about that weekend. And sometimes when the wind is just right, I swear I hear the whispers again, calling my name from the forest, waiting for me to return. Story. The end. The sun was sinking behind the ridges of the Appalachians as four friends, Tom, Rachel, Danny, and Mia, drove down a gravel forest road. They had been planning this weekend camping trip for months, wanting to escape the chaos of their city lives. They had heard of a remote spot near Pine Hollow, a section of forest notorious among locals for being off the map, and thought the isolation would make for a perfect adventure. They arrived at dusk, carrying their gear down a narrow trail lined with thick, gnarled trees. The forest smelled damp and earthy, with the faint, acrid scent of decaying leaves. They set up 2 tents in a small clearing beside a sluggish creek. The water reflected the last orange glow of the sky, darkening quickly as night approached. Tom and Danny built a fire while Rachel and Mia unpacked their food and sleeping bags. The fire crackled, sparks flying upward into the night sky. Laughter bounced off the trees as they roasted hot dogs and marshmallows. As darkness fully settled, the forest seemed to grow quieter, the usual sounds of crickets and frogs muted. "I don't like how quiet it's gotten," Mia whispered, her voice small in the still night. "You're just imagining it," Tom said, tossing another log onto the fire. "We're way out here, quiet as normal." Still, there was a tension, a subtle feeling that something was watching them from the shadows beyond the firelight. Around 11 p.m., the first odd noises began, soft, rhythmic tapping from somewhere deep in the trees. Rachel froze, straining to hear. "What is that?" she asked. "Probably an animal," Danny said, though his tone lacked conviction. The tapping grew louder, more deliberate, as if something, or someone, was moving closer. The friends huddled near the fire, shining flashlights into the darkness, but the beam revealed only swaying branches and thick undergrowth. Suddenly, Mia screamed. The sound was sharp, urgent, piercing the night. The others spun toward her voice. She pointed to a shadow darting behind the trees, a figure unnaturally tall with long limbs that moved in jerky, impossible motions. "Run!" Tom shouted. They grabbed their gear and bolted into the woods, adrenaline surging. Branches whipped against their faces and arms, roots tripping them as they stumbled through the underbrush. The figure pursued them silently, its movements quick, deliberate, inhuman. They reached a small, abandoned ranger station deep in the forest. Its windows were boarded up and the door hung loosely on broken hinges, but it offered the only shelter. They barricaded themselves inside with wooden planks and old furniture. Hearts pounding, breaths coming in ragged gasps. Through the cracks in the walls where they could hear it circling, scratching at the wood, whispering words they couldn't understand. It seemed to be taunting them, patient yet aggressive. Every so often, its breath or a guttural growl would make them flinch in terror. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. They had lost all sense of time. Tom whispered, "We need a plan. We can't stay here forever." Rachel shivered. "We can't fight it, whatever it is. We just need to survive until daylight." Suddenly, the door splintered violently. The creature entered. Its face was obscured by shadows, but its eyes, pale, reflective, and unblinking, glimmered in the dim light. Its long fingers ended in sharp, claw-like nails. It moved with unnatural speed, darting from corner to corner, sniffing, growling, circling them. Mia was frozen with fear. Danny swung a rusty chair at it, striking it in the side. It recoiled slightly but didn't retreat. With a speed that defied human ability, it lunged at Mia. Tom pushed her aside, taking a deep slash across his arm in the process. In the chaos, Rachel grabbed a lantern, swinging it at the creature. Flames licked its form, but it barely reacted, hissing instead of screaming. Tom yelled for them to escape out the back, a window that led into a narrow ditch, overgrown with weeds. One by one, they clambered through, cutting themselves on branches and rocks, adrenaline pushing them forward. They ran blindly through the forest, the sounds of pursuit fading slightly but never disappearing completely. After what seemed like hours, they stumbled onto a logging road where an old truck passed by. The driver stopped immediately, startled by their disheveled, bleeding appearances. They screamed for help, pointing back toward the forest. When the driver shone a flashlight into the trees, there was nothing. No figure, no tracks, no evidence of a struggle. Only the silence of the forest and the occasional crack of a distant branch. Authorities searched the area the next day, but found no trace of the creature or anyone else in the forest. The ranger station was empty, abandoned as it had been decades ago. There were no footprints, no claw marks, nothing that could explain the terror the four friends had endured. Months later, Tom began receiving strange text messages on his phone, all from an unknown number. Simple phrases like, "I see you," "You can't hide," or "Back in the woods soon," haunted him. Rachel reported similar experiences. Danny and Mia were plagued by nightmares, dreams of being trapped in a dark forest, chased by a faceless, towering figure whispering their names. No one ever returned to Pine Hollow. But sometimes when the wind blows through the Appalachian ridges, Tom and Rachel swear they hear the soft, deliberate tapping of long claws against wood and the low, almost human whispering calling their names from the darkness. Story the end. It was mid-September when Jenna, Mark, and Tyler decided to take a weekend trip into the Allegheny National Forest. They wanted to escape the chaos of college life, away from phones, Wi-Fi, and responsibilities. The plan was simple. Set up camp, hike a little, fish, roast hot dogs over a fire, and sleep under the stars. They had rented a small campsite map from the ranger station, but Jenna insisted they wander further into the backwoods for true seclusion. By late afternoon, they were deep into the forest, past marked trails and overgrown paths. Tyler, carrying the GPS, led the way. Mark was in charge of firewood, and Jenna held the map, comparing it occasionally with the trail. After nearly 2 hours of walking, they stumbled into a small clearing surrounded by tall pines. It was perfect. Flat ground, a small creek running nearby, and enough open space for 2 tents and a campfire. "This is perfect," Tyler said, setting his backpack down. "No one else for miles." Jenna nodded, though a slight unease had settled over her. There was something about the shadows cast by the trees that seemed unnatural. She ignored it, chalking it up to nerves. They worked together to set up the tents. The sun sank low, casting the clearing in a golden-orange haze. By the time the fire was lit, the forest had transformed. The silence was dense, punctuated only by the occasional rustle of leaves or a bird calling in the distance. As night fell, they roasted hot dogs and marshmallows, telling jokes and stories to lighten the mood. Then, as Jenna stretched and poked the fire, she noticed movement along the tree line. Something, or someone was watching them. A shadow, tall and still, disappearing behind a tree as soon as she blinked. "Probably a deer," Mark said, laughing nervously. Tyler shined a flashlight toward the movement, but saw nothing. The wind rustled, creating shapes that played tricks on their eyes. But Jenna couldn't shake the feeling. They weren't alone. Later, when the fire had burned low and they had crawled into their tents, the forest seemed to change. Every small noise, the snap of a twig, a brush of leaves, felt amplified. Jenna lay awake, straining to listen. Then she heard it. Soft, deliberate footsteps around the campsite. They weren't running like an animal fleeing, but pacing, circling, slow and measured. She whispered to Mark, but he murmured back that she was imagining things. Tyler snored lightly in his tent. Hours passed. Then a low growl came from somewhere in the darkness. Jenna froze. The growl was unlike anything she had heard in nature. Deep, guttural, intelligent. Her flashlight rested next to her. Gathering courage, she unzipped her tent slightly and aimed the beam toward the trees. 2 glowing eyes reflected the light back. They were unnervingly close to the ground, too wide for any deer or bear she had seen. The eyes blinked slowly, unblinking, unafraid. She yanked the zipper closed and sat trembling. The next morning, sunlight made the forest seem calm, almost ordinary. But when they emerged from their tents, they found the ground around their campsite disturbed, deep, clawed footprints in a circle. Not human, not bear. Something else. Maybe a mountain lion? Tyler suggested, though his voice lacked confidence. They decided to hike to the nearest trail, thinking distance would make them safer. The trail narrowed as they went deeper, the forest thickening, the light dimming under the canopy. A couple of hours later, they stumbled upon a small, abandoned cabin hidden among the trees. Its door hung off the hinges, windows broken. Inside, the air smelled of mold and rot, and scratched into the walls were strange symbols, lines, circles, patterns that didn't resemble any language they knew. This is creepy, Jenna said, stepping back. Yeah, we shouldn't stay, Mark added. Then they heard it again, footsteps, growls, and whispers that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The air felt heavy, almost alive, pressing down on them. Panic set in. They bolted toward the path, but the forest seemed to close in, paths twisting, making it impossible to tell which way led back. Branches clawed at their clothes and faces. The growling and whispers followed, echoing through the trees. Something moved in the shadows, tall, thin, with glowing eyes, moving in ways that defied natural motion. Hours, or maybe minutes, Jenna couldn't tell. Later, they broke through the tree line onto an old dirt road. Their legs burned, lungs burned, but the road was a lifeline. Cars didn't pass, but the sight of civilization, even distant, brought relief. At a small gas station at the edge of the forest, they collapsed, shaking, trying to explain what happened. The attendant listened silently, then said, quietly, "Those woods, they don't forget. Some people wander in and never come out. The locals know to stay away. You were lucky." They never returned. Even years later, whenever Jenna drives past the forest, she feels eyes on her, hears the faint snap of twigs, the soft, intelligent growl carried on the wind. The memory of those glowing eyes, unblinking, stalking them through the trees, is permanent. She knows one day the forest might remember them again. Story the end.